So David Benevidez captures the stoppage over Demetrius Andrade as Andrade retires in the 6th round. Now, this was a pretty good fight. I didn't watch it live, I watched it and repeat this morning, and it was a very engaging watch. So if you haven't seen it, check it out. I didn't do a pre-fight video on this fight just because I've been busy, I've had other commitments and stuff, but I felt that David Benavidez probably would win by stoppage, but I didn't see it coming this early. I anticipated it being round 9, 10, 11, maybe 12, like quite late in the fight. But if it's come at the halfway point, that did surprise me. I felt both guys performed relatively well. They both displayed their ability, the abilities that they've kind of been known to have, almost like their trademarks. If we start at the beginning of the fight, I felt that David Benavidez did a good job of setting the necessary tone from early on. He was steadily cutting off the ring and doing a good job of keeping Demetrius Andrade in front of him. Now, David Benavidez, he's no Gennady Golovkin when it comes to pressure fighting and cutting off the ring. I don't want to say he's that effective and that efficient, but he did a pretty good job because Demetrius Andrade, southpaw, athletic, moves well. You want to be able to pin him down. And I thought that's what David Benavidez was able to do. He, as I say, did a good job of keeping Andrade in front of him, and that means the target's always visible and it's probably going to be in reach as well. He lined up some good shots, David Benavidez, some straight shots in particular, having a lot of success off of the kind of lead hand jockeying that's very common in southpaw versus orthodox matchups. That being said, Demetrius Andrade was very much a live dog in the fight early on. He landed plenty of pot shots and even some counter punching in counter to what David Benavidez was doing, which was very impressive. You know, say what you want about Andrade, but he's a great athlete and he's got some pretty good technique. He was throwing these combinations with blistering speed, very creative, very eye-catchy. But not all of the shots were getting through. David Benavidez has that build where he seems to have like really long arms but a relatively short torso, and it's almost like a cheat code because he can block and he covers most of his body and his head. You know, it's effective, but still some shots were getting through. But of course, you know, if Andrade throws a 6, 7, 8 punch combination, but only 2 of the shots are getting through, you know, it's better than all punches getting through. So David Benavidez showing some decent ability to block shots and tuck up and whatnot. Round 3 was where I felt Demetrius Andrade was kind of coming into a bit of, like, finding a bit of a stride in the fight. But it's ironically when he started to unravel as well. I feel like the beginning of round 3, Demetrius Andrade, it was kind of finding his mojo a little bit, but then I don't know, man. Like David Benavidez just kind of upped the intensity a little bit, and I feel it was quite alarming in the 3rd round how quickly Demetrius Andrade unraveled, because it was within the space of a few seconds. He's throwing combinations, landing good pot shots, some decent counter punches. Looks like he's in the fight. And all of a sudden, the complexity of the fight just changed, and Demetrius Andrade looked like he was almost a bit like worse for wear. And I feel like that's where David Benavidez really started to turn up the heat, and you know, he was pushing the issue more. And by this point, Demetrius Andrade was giving up ground much more rapidly and much more readily than he was before. So yeah, that was going into the 3rd round, or concluding the 3rd round. Then we go into the 4th round, and it's kind of more of the same. But just to be fair, Demetrius Andrade, he was, you know, he didn't just check out. He wasn't like, oh, on his bike from now. There was just a marked difference in, you know, how much he was moving. It seemed like by this point he was kind of throwing punches just to gain some space, just to keep David Benavidez off. And now you do need to kind of draw a line in the sand when you're fighting someone like Benavidez, who has that kind of marauding style where he's just looking to come up close and almost suffocate you with pressure. you do need to stick it on him, you know, for lack of a better term. Draw a line in the sand, sting him with something, and say, hey, you're not just gonna close this gap on me. You're gonna have to think about what you do, otherwise I'm gonna hit you upside the head with something. But Benevidez, quite an audacious fighter, you know, he looks to impose that pressure on you. And in the fourth round, he just landed a crunching right hand that dropped Demetrius Andrade, sent him straight to the canvas. You know, on the slow-mo, the right hand, after Demetrius Andrade got hit by it, his eyes looked like they were in separate orbit. It was a good setup from David Benevidez because he kind of had a subtle jab to the body feint. You know, he just feinted ever so slightly and then followed up with this sweeping overhand right. And it seemed to catch Demetrius Andrade on the tip of the chin and just sent him down. As I say, he was, you know, seriously hurt by that one. But he got up and he looked like he recovered fairly well. You know, it was a relatively heavy knockdown, but he got up. Luckily for him, it was in the closing seconds of round 4. And so he was able to recover in the corner. But yeah, that was a big round for Benevidez. And it was well and truly the turning point, because then going into round 5 and round 6, Andrade was still trying. He showed a certain amount of heart because he was trying to get off some offense, and he did have some success. And there's a reason why, which we'll get to. He was having some success, but the mounting pressure from Benevidez was just too much. You know, Benevidez comes up close, and he was just, as I say, he suffocates you because he's physical as well. He'll pin you down, he'll control your head, land with one shot, and, you know, he goes to the head, he goes to the body, and he's got those long arms, so he can get quite a lot of leverage, particularly in the body shots as well. But then he also shortens his shots up. You know, for a guy who's, 6'2", 6'3" at super middleweight, he shortens his shots up quite well, and he's, you know, quite creative. So, yeah, by this point, Andrade is kind of just being dogged out of the fight. You know, he's feeling the heat, and he tried to use a few veteran tricks of, you know, spitting the gum shield out, or at least the first instance where the gum shield came out, that looked like it was maybe, okay, you maybe played that on a little bit. The second time, I think it just got smacked clean out of his mouth, and the referee let go on for a good few seconds. And yeah, by that point, Andrade was taking an absolute shellacking. And yeah, as harsh as it sounded, it got to a point where Andrade just got victimized. He was just getting bullied, and he couldn't deal with the pressure. You know, you could see the expression on his face. He didn't really have a kind of a steely determination. I think the spirit had just kind of been beaten out of him, and he had success with his kind of last ditch attempts of offense, and he'd land clean with certain punches, but Benevidez just wouldn't relent. And that's one thing about Benevidez, is he kind of has this very relaxed, kind of unorthodox style where he's not too textbook. You know, it's almost like he freestyles his way through, and that, I want to say, has pluses and minuses. It's a couple of pluses are that it's quite efficient, because Benevidez is not the kind of fighter who strains. You know, he's not one of these guys when he's landing big punches and you see this massive grimace on his face. It's quite efficient. He's quite relaxed when he does it, and it's unorthodox. It's not textbook, so it can catch fighters off guard when they've been conditioned over the course of their amateur and pro career to spot certain techniques. When you have a guy who's unorthodox, he can kind of throw that off. However, he lacks a bit of structure, and therefore I think sometimes he's out of position, he doesn't realise, and it was times like that where Andrade was just able to time him or kind of catch him out of position with a shot. And ultimately it didn't really amount to much, because David Benevidez, even if he got hit flush, he was coming straight back. But yeah, it got to a point where at the end of the sixth round, Demetrius Andrade's gone back to his corner. Or is it the beginning of the 6th round? I can't remember. But it was basically the 6th round. Andrade was in his corner. The referee came over and said, you know, like, you can't have another round like that. If you do, I'm stopping the fight. You need to show me something. Which I think is fair enough. And obviously, Andrade's cornermen are there. The cameramen are there. And it looked like Andrade quit. Now, I haven't seen anybody else's opinion on this fight or their reaction to it. So I don't know if there's any controversies around, oh, Andrade did quit, Andrade didn't quit. But from what I saw, he quit, you know. And I'm not going to rag on him for that because he was taking an absolute shellacking and he's clearly reached his limit. But I believe it's his dad in his corner or some other family member. He looked at him and I could see Andrade shaking his head. You know, he was saying no. I couldn't hear exactly what he said, but just watching his lips move when he was speaking, it looked like he said, stop it. Which, you know, let's call a spade a spade. He quit. It's that simple. As I say, I'm not going to come down too hard on him because I wasn't the one in there, you know, being suffocated by Benevidez, taking all those punches. And, you know, Andrade showed a certain amount of heart earlier in the fight, especially after he was hurt. He kept trying. He was trying to still do anything he could to get a foothold in the fight. And I think he probably just realised, like, you know what, this is an exercise in futility. And he was like, you know what, I'm checking out, man. I've reached my limit. So, yeah. Benevidez makes Demetrius Andrade quit and moves onwards and upwards. I imagine for Andrade, this is probably the end. You know, his career has been less than stellar. It's been quite frustrating to follow his career over the years. As a boxing consumer, I can only imagine how frustrating it is for him. I'm not sure how much money he's made over his career, but probably one of those guys who you'd imagine should have done more given his ability and his talent. And I know some people, they argue that Andrade was never that good anyway. Personally, I thought he was. I did think Andrade was a good, talented, dangerous fighter. But, you know, sometimes you can't win them all. And Andrade probably fall by the wayside after this. I imagine. I think. You know, I could be wrong, but we can only see what happens going forward. Benevidez, he moves onwards and upwards. You know, it's going to be exciting to see Benevidez continue. He's a young man, and there are some interesting fights out there. Personally, and I'm sure you guys agree, I want to see Benevidez versus Canelo. I never bought that whole Canelo thing where he was not fighting Benevidez because he don't want to fight another Mexican. That's BS, man. You got to fight Benevidez. Canelo's a great fighter. I've got a lot of admiration for him, but you got to fight Benevidez. It's that simple. So, yeah, hopefully this 3-fight deal that Canelo has with PBC culminates in a Benevidez fight. We can only hope. But I imagine it will happen sooner or later. I do. I don't think Canelo... I think Canelo's ego probably get the better of him. And I'm not saying that Benevidez beats Canelo. I just think it's an interesting fight and a fight that needs to happen. But we'll see. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Have you seen this fight and what did you think? Yeah, leave them down there and I'll get back to you. Thanks for listening. I'll catch you in the next video.